Welcome to our channel. I hope you are all well. In today's video, we have 3 most terrifying horror stories. So without wasting any time, let's get started.
Mr. Thompson was known for his eccentric field trips, but this one was different. He had a strange gleam in his eye when he told us about Lakewood Amusement Park in Kingston, New York, an abandoned place that had been closed for decades after a series of tragic accidents. He claimed it was for a local history lesson, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. As our bus pulled up to the dilapidated gates, Park loomed before us like a ghost from the past. The once vibrant signs were faded, and the rides stood as rusting giants, overtaken by nature. The air was thick with decay, and an unnatural silence hung over the place. "All right, class, let's explore," Mr. Thompson said, his voice unnervingly chipper. "This is a rare opportunity to see history frozen in time." We hesitated, but followed him into the park. The deeper we ventured, the stronger the feeling of being watched grew. "Mr. Thompson, this place feels wrong," Lisa whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. "Nonsense, Lisa," Mr. Thompson replied, waving her concerns away. "It's just an old park, nothing more." But I noticed something strange. Mr. Thompson seemed to know exactly where he was going, as if he had been here before. We passed the decrepit roller coaster, and I swore I saw movement in the shadows. Ethan, always the daredevil, suggested we follow the faint sound of carnival music that seemed to come from nowhere. The music led us to the old carousel. It stood eerily still, its horses frozen in mid-gallop. Without warning, it sprang to life, spinning slowly as the haunting melody grew louder. The mirrors reflected distorted versions of ourselves. There was something more. Ghostly figures, children dressed in old-fashioned clothes, riding the horses with blank expressions. "Mr. Thompson, what's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. He smiled, but it was a cold, unsettling smile. "They've been waiting for you," he said cryptically. Before we could react, the gates slammed shut, wrapping us inside the park. The carousel spun faster, and the ghostly children turned to face us, their eyes empty, their mouths twisted into eerie smiles. "Run," I shouted, but it was too late. Mr. Thompson stood by the carousel, watching us with a look of satisfaction. "You see," he began, "I've been waiting for this day. They promised me something long ago, a chance to rewrite history, and you're all part of the deal." We tried to escape, but something unseen held us back. The air grew cold, and the laughter of the ghostly children echoed around us. "Mr. Thompson, stop this!" Ethan yelled, but our teacher only chuckled darkly. "History must repeat itself," he said, his voice echoing with the voices of the past. The last thing I remember was Mr. Thompson's eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light, before everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold, damp ground, the sun just beginning to rise. I could hear the distant sound of police sirens, but my mind was a haze. As I sat up, I realized I wasn't alone. My classmates were scattered around me, all of us dazed and confused. Ethan was the first to speak. What happened?" he asked, rubbing his head as if trying to shake off a bad dream. "I don't know," I replied, my voice weak. "The last thing I remember is Mr. Thompson, and then..." But the memories were gone, like a dream that slips away the moment you wake up. We all looked at each other, hoping someone else remembered more, but it was clear. We had no idea how we ended up outside the park, or what had happened inside. Police found us huddled together near the entrance, but Mr. Thompson was nowhere to be seen. They searched the park, but there was no sign of him, or any of the strange things we thought we had seen. The carousel was still, the mirrors shattered, and the music that had haunted our dreams was silent. Back at school, the story spread like wildfire, but every time someone asked us what had happened, we could only shake our heads in confusion. We knew we had been there, knew something terrible had occurred, but the details were lost, locked away in the deepest corners of our mind. The authorities chalked it up to a case of collective hysteria, a result of the creepy atmosphere, and our imaginations running wild. But I knew better. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the cold hands, hear the faint echoes of carnival music, and see Mr. Thompson's eerie smile. And sometimes, late at night, I would catch a glimpse of something in the mirror. A flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong. I would turn away quickly, afraid of what I might see if I looked too long, afraid that the memories might come flooding back. But deep down, I knew the truth. Mr. Thompson had made a deal with something dark, something that lurked in the forgotten corners of history, and we had been the price. Now, every time I pass an old, abandoned place, I feel a shiver run down my spine, because I know that somewhere out there, Mr. Thompson is still waiting for the next group of students to wander into his twisted version of history. And I know that one day, the memories will return. And when they do, I'll have to face the truth of what really happened in Lakewood Amusement Park. But until then, I'll keep pretending, keep telling myself that it was just a nightmare, because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. Miss Harper, our history teacher, had a knack for unusual field trips. This time, she organized a weekend getaway for our history club at Lake Crescent in Olympic National Park, Washington. She promised us a special treat, a guided tour by a local named Mr. Blackwood, who was known for his enigmatic and captivating stories about the area. The cabin Miss Harper rented was isolated, nestled deep in the woods by the lake. It was charming in a rustic way, but had an unsettling quietness about it. Mr. Blackwood met us at dusk, his presence commanding and mysterious. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that kept his face shrouded in shadow. "I'll be leading you on a historical tour," Mr. Blackwood said in a deep, smooth voice. "This place holds many stories, and some of them are better experienced than told." We followed him as night fell, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the path. The woods were eerily silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. Mr. Blackwood spoke in a low tone, recounting the area's history with a sense of foreboding. "Many have come here seeking understanding," he said, guiding us to a secluded part of the lake. "Some have found more than they bargained for." The water was unusually still, reflecting the moonlight like a dark, glassy sheet. As we stood there, the air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling began to creep over us. The once clear path seemed to twist and bend in ways that defied logic. Shadows in the trees seemed to shift and change, and every now and then we heard faint, almost imperceptible sounds, like whispers carried by the wind. "Where are we going next?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. "To a place where the stories are told in silence," Mr. Blackwood replied cryptically. He led us to an old boathouse, its wooden exterior weathered and decaying. The structure looked like it hadn't been used in years. Inside, the air was damp and musty, and the floor creaked with every step. Old photographs of people and places adorned the walls, their frames covered in a thick layer of dust. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of neglect and decay. As we explored, the door behind us slammed shut with a resounding thud. We jumped, and Ethan moved to open it, only to find it locked tight. Panic began to set in. The air grew even colder, and the light from Mr. Blackwood's lantern flickered erratically. "Mr. Blackwood, let us out!" Lisa called, her voice rising in desperation. He turned slowly, his eyes gleaming in the lantern's light. "The stories are not just told," he said calmly. "They are experienced, and tonight you are here to experience." The room seemed to close in on us. The shadows on the walls twisted into unsettling shapes, and the temperature dropped sharply. The whispers grew louder, though no one was speaking. The feeling of being watched became almost palpable. "We need to get out of here," I shouted, trying to stay calm. We tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The claustrophobic space made it hard to think straight. The sense of dread grew as the air became thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of our own frantic breathing. With a final burst of effort, we managed to pry the door open and stumbled out into the night. We ran back to the cabin, our hearts pounding in our chests. Mr. Blackwood's figure stood in the distance, barely visible through the trees, watching us as we fled. The next morning, everything seemed to be back to normal. The cabin was quiet, and Mr. Blackwood had vanished without a trace. Authorities searched the area, but there was no sign of him or the eerie experiences we had encountered. At school, we tried to recount the events, but no one seemed to understand the full extent of our fear. The boathouse was empty, the photographs gone, and the memories felt hazy, like a dream slipping away. Our history teacher, Mr. Anderson, was known for his unorthodox teaching methods. So when he announced a field trip to the Ravens Hollow Cemetery in Cedar Creek, Maine, it piqued our interest. The cemetery had a reputation for being a historical treasure trove, with graves dating back centuries. Mr. Anderson promised us an evening of exploring local history and uncovering forgotten stories. The trip started out like any other. The cemetery was old and overgrown, with weathered tombstones standing like silent sentinels over the past. As dusk fell, the atmosphere grew somber and reflective. Mr. Anderson, with his usual enthusiasm, began recounting the stories behind some of the graves. The air was filled with the murmurs of the wind and the occasional rustle of leaves. But something was off. As we wandered through the cemetery, I noticed one student, Emily, acting strangely. She was quiet and kept to herself, her eyes darting around nervously. I overheard her muttering something about the pact and secrets waiting to be uncovered. But when I tried to approach her, she simply stared at me with a look of intense fear. "Everything okay, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Shh," she whispered, her gaze fixed on a particular part of the cemetery. "I need to show you something." Despite my unease, curiosity got the better of me. Emily led me to a secluded area of the cemetery, far from the rest of the group. She stopped in front of an old, crumbling mausoleum, its entrance partially hidden by vines. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Listen," Emily said, her voice barely audible. She placed her ear against the cold stone wall. I did the same, and for a moment, all I could hear was the rhythmic thump of my own heartbeat. Then, faintly, there was a sound, like someone whispering urgently, though the words were indistinguishable. Emily's face turned pale and she backed away. "There's something inside," she said, her voice trembling, "something that shouldn't be here." I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the wind or our overactive imaginations, but Emily's fear was palpable and the sense of dread was growing stronger. I suggested we return to the group, but Emily insisted we investigate further. As we approached the mausoleum, the atmosphere became heavier. The temperature seemed to drop, and the wind howled through the trees. The entrance was partially ajar, and a dark, oppressive feeling emanated from within. We could see faint, flickering lights moving around inside, like candle flames dancing in the dark. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her face set with determination. "We need to find out what's in there. It's important." With a deep breath, we pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was musty and dimly lit by the flickering candles. Old, dusty artifacts and faded portraits lined the walls. In the center of the room was a table with an ancient-looking book lying open, its pages covered in strange symbols and writing. As I approached the book, a chill ran down my spine. The air felt charged, almost electric. I glanced back at Emily, who was now standing near the shadows, her face hidden. "I think we should leave," I said, feeling a growing sense of panic. Just then, we heard footsteps approaching from behind us. I turned to see Mr. Anderson and the rest of the group entering the mausoleum, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. Mr. Anderson's expression was unreadable, and he glanced at the book with an inscrutable look. "Well, well," he said, his tone oddly calm. "It seems you've discovered something interesting." "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This place," Mr. Anderson said slowly, "holds many secrets, and sometimes it's best left undisturbed." The lights began to flicker wildly, and the room grew colder. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like an invisible storm. Emily was no longer visible, having vanished into the shadows. "Where did she go?" I asked, my voice rising with desperation. Mr. Anderson didn't answer. He simply watched as the room seemed to close in on us. The temperature dropped further, and the whispers became a cacophony of indistinguishable voices. We felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The next thing I remember, we were outside. The mausoleum door shut tight behind us. The group was disoriented, and Emily was nowhere to be found. The cemetery was still and quiet, as if nothing had happened. Back at school, we were told that Emily had left the trip early, and no one seemed to know where she had gone. The mausoleum remained locked, and the authorities found no sign of anything unusual.
That's for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. And if you want us to tell your stories to our viewers, feel free to send your stories, incident or experiences to our email. Just try to make the grammar neat and understandable. See you in the next video. Take care. Goodbye.